Okay, hi everybody. I'm Judy Arnall, and I am going to talk tonight about the growing brain. And I hope to give you a good overview of how the brain works and what those implications are for different parenting challenges. So, a few housekeeping things. I'm just going to record this, so maybe if you want to leave your questions till the end, that would be awesome. And this is unit 1 of actually a 7-section course. So, for example, one unit's on social development, one's on academic development, one is on emotional development, language, another is on behavior, and another unit's on play. So it's a lovely, lovely course. It's put together by the Growing Brain from Washington, D.C., from 0 to 3 organization. Many of you are probably familiar with that organization. They do a lot of research, and this put together a lot of educational courses for professionals. So this course is actually geared to daycares, childcare professionals, teachers, preschool, as well as parents. So a lot of the discussion questions are geared to group care, but it's just as relevant for anyone, especially this first unit on the brain. So I offer this course. It's 7 sessions online over a month. So we do every Monday and Thursday, just so that you're not always on Zoom. If you're interested, go to professionalparenting.ca to register. So this is me. I'm Judy. I'm certified Canadian Family Life Educator, and I'm certified in the brain and child development. And that's been my passion in my life, is helping parents understand why kids do what they do. I've written a few books. They're all print books, and they're all over the place. So, okay, so let's get started. What I like to do is turn off my video because I sometimes get distracted. And you see me now, I said hello, and I'll come in and say goodbye at the end. So we set this up as a webinar, so it's not very interactive. Sorry about that, but that's what we did. Okay, so let's start then. Oh, we're not going to do introductions, and we're not going to do group guidelines. Okay, anybody want to guess for how much a baby's brain weighs? So let's say a 1-month-old. How big is that brain? Anybody want to guess how much? Would it be 1 pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds? Okay, right. It's about 1 pound. So it's a little more than 3/4 of a pound. It's between 0.77 and 0.88 of a pound. This is what the size of a baby's brain is compared to an adult brain. So a baby's brain is this big, and an adult brain is anywhere from almost a little under 3 pounds to 3 pounds, 8 ounces. Anyone want to guess how much a 6-year-old brain weighs? It's 95% of the adult brain. So yes, it is almost 3 pounds, which is very interesting. At 1 year of age, like in between here, the baby's brain is 2 pounds. Yeah, so it's kind of the difference between an orange and a pineapple, which is really interesting. But does that mean that when a 6-year-old has 95% of the volume of an adult brain, does it mean it also has the functionality of an adult brain? Of course not, right? A 6-year-old cannot balance a checkbook or babysit your 2-year-old. Size is just one way that a human brain grows. It also grows in connectivity. We're going to talk a bit about that tonight. Okay, so let's go through the brain and look at the parts and what they do. So the brain functions via neural networks. So in other words, there's not one single brain area that's for example, the emotional area of the brain. Although we do talk about it in parts. We do talk about brain parts that way, but the brain works together and develops in all regions over time, and parts become interconnected with each other. So it's this interconnection of neural networks that helps to explain our complex human thoughts, emotions, and behavior, because eventually they're all tied together. Now, the brain is part of the nervous system. The nervous system consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of the spinal cord and brain, and the spinal cord receives information from the skin, the joints, and muscles. It carries all the nerve impulses that control our movements. And our brains receive information from all the parts of our body through the spinal cord. Now, the peripheral nervous system is made up of nerve fibers that branch off from the spinal cord into all the parts of the body. And the autonomic nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system. That's what regulates body functions such as heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate. And that's the part that is most developed in babies because they have to survive. So let's look at the autonomous, I have a hard time saying this, part of the nervous system. We can divide that into two branches, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. So when we are under stress, which one do you think gets activated? The sympathetic, right? That's the one that gears up. So for example, if you had to do a presentation at work, your sympathetic nervous system would kick into high gear. That's why we often have a dry mouth when we're giving speeches. Our hearts just pound, 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 pound. We can't feel that we can eat anything. We almost feel nauseated, and we have to go pee a lot. So that is a sympathetic nervous system, and it's good. It tells the body, gear up for fight, flight, or freeze in reactions to stress. So then you do your presentation at work, and 20 minutes after your presentation, you're feeling really good. You nailed it. Your boss is happy. And then your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And that's what we call the rest and digest. So that's the one that goes, I'm done. So then you could actually eat. You're hungry then. You're feeling more relaxed. And this is the way you want to be. This is what we want to be about 90% of the time. Now, we do need some stress in our life, but only a little bit of stress is good for us. When children undergo toxic stress, which is evident in when they're experiencing adverse childhood experiences, this is what gets stimulated, the sympathetic nervous system. And this is not good on the body for long-term stress. So when newborns or babies are crying at night and we leave them be, we let them cry it out, it's not the parasympathetic nervous system that is occurring, it's a sympathetic nervous system. And this is not good for prolonged periods of time. Okay, and so the brain is a control center for the overall nervous system. And the nervous system begins to develop in the first few weeks in utero as the neural tube. That's what it is. It's a hollow structure from which the brain and spinal cord form. And the neural tube closes. Then the development of the brain starts in utero through a process called neural induction. As the embryo grows, certain cells specialize, developing into nerve tissue. Once induction has occurred, the cells are then signaled to move or migrate to particular positions to form different areas of the brain. So very early forms of the major regions of the brain, the optic vesicle, the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain become visible at 4 weeks following conception. By 6 months after conception, ridges form that give the brain that bumpy appearance. Now, the migration of the cells that form these different brain regions is influenced by experiences such as maternal substance use, exposure to toxins, as well as genetic differences that the child has inherited. So, let's look at the major regions of the brain. We can divide the brain into two, the forebrain, which are higher order functions, and the midbrain or hindbrain, which are the lower order functions. Which do you suppose is most developed when babies are born? Yes, the midbrain and the hindbrain. So the brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front. So this critical thinking part, the last part of the brain to form, is not what babies have. So, when you read baby books and they say, oh, if you bring your baby into bed with you, they're going to get used to it and they're going to think, how can I make sure this happens every night? That is higher order critical thinking that babies just don't have. They just feel alone, they feel scared, they feel hungry, and they cry. That's all they do, those lower order functions. Okay, so the hindbrain is located at the base of the brain near the spine, and that right here controls breathing, heart rhythm, and blood sugar levels. The midbrain is located between the hindbrain and forebrain, and that helps eye movement, hearing, motor control, sleep-wake patterns, alertness, and temperature regulation. And those two together are called the brainstem. So the cerebellum is the hindbrain right here, and those are really well developed to keep the body surviving. So children are survivalists. They have enough brain power just to keep going, and they don't have a lot of the development of thinking skills yet here. Now, we can divide the forebrain into different parts. And this includes the cerebrum, which is the largest part of the brain. The cerebrum contains 4 lobes, and the cerebral cortex is the outer layer of the cerebrum. So it's kind of like an orange peel on top of the orange. So we're going to look at these 4 lobes in depth. So how do you remember these? I try and link them with what age group they're particularly sensitive in developing during. So temporal, toddler, brainstem, baby, parietal, preschooler, frontal, first grade, and prefrontal, puberty, right? So you can kind of just narrow it down like that. The occipital lobe also belongs with the baby category. When a baby is 3 months old, they have the same sight as an adult does. Okay, so let's look at this. What does the frontal lobe do? Okay, it coordinates motor movement, and it contains the higher order cognitive skills such as thinking, planning, and problem solving. This is what we call executive functioning. It's also responsible for personality and emotional processing. Now, the parietal lobe is responsible for sensory processing, such as, knowing where your body is in space. And you can see this when a young toddler tries to avoid other children who are in her path to get to the block shelf. and this develops really well over time. It also regulates attention, or how well a person is able to focus on thoughts and actions. So toddlers are not able to sit still and eat a dinner for 5 minutes. But you can start expecting that during the preschool years. So that attention, they can sit still for about 5 to 10 minutes when they're about age 3 to 5. You can expect that. And then you can expect it to get better as they move into the school age years. But that's why preschoolers don't go to mandatory school until they're age 6. It is also responsible for language development, being able to learn and recall words to communicate. So a person with damage to their parietal lobe might experience challenges in speaking or remembering words. Okay, the occipital lobe has responsibility mostly for visual processing, and this is very much developed, as I said, in babyhood. The temporal lobe processes auditory information, language recognition, stores visual memories, and has short-term and long-term memory and emotional responses. So you can see the sensitivity of this section of the brain during toddlerhood, because it also contains the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. And those 3 structures are responsible for a flood of emotions during the toddler years. And when toddlers are experiencing a flood of emotions and they don't have that prefrontal cortex thinking skills to handle their emotions, what do? They tantrum, which is perfectly normal. So that is why the temporal lobe it's very well protected right in the middle of the brain, because it's the emotional center. It also becomes sensitive again in puberty, the same way as in toddlerhood, which is kind of interesting. Okay, the amygdala is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze responses, remember, in our sympathetic nervous system, and it helps us interpret our environment as dangerous or safe. The amygdala is often called the panic button of the brain. So what happens when children are under toxic stress? So that stress that is ongoing, not supported by an adult, what happens is it disconnects signals between the hippocampus and the amygdala. And that is how, when we say cortisol damages brains or can impair brain development, that's what's happening in that temporal lobe. Okay, so we're going to just review. So the brain develops from the back to the front, bottom to top. The brainstem has the everyday functions. The forebrain is the last part to develop fully. There's 4 lobes of the cerebral cortex, and the brain's main structures are present at birth, but only some are full grown. Okay, that's good. So, what I wanted to show you now was the other way the brain grows, not just in size or volume, but within connections between the nerve cells or neurons. So how does this work? Neurons communicate with each other by sending nerve impulses. As you watch this video, watch the nerve impulses that come down this dendrite and reaches out to the neighboring neuron's axon. And there's a little gap there called a synapse. And what this does is the nerve impulse is a neurotransmitter that crosses that gap into the neighboring neurons, and with repeatedness, it forms a connection, or what we call a connection. Yes, that's right. Let me just start this. This is fascinating. So the application of this is when we sit down with a toddler and we read them a book, and you know how toddlers love the same books over and over and over and over again. Every time you read that book, you are strengthening that connection right there. Another example is your preschooler loves to pull the dog's tail. So every time you say to that preschooler, we treat the dog gently. Let's pat like this. And you say that 20 times a day, over and over and over. You are strengthening those brain connections and forming pathways. So every time you're building a connection when you repeat things and you follow routines. And eventually your child will stop pulling the dog's tail because they will remember. So I just love this film. This is how it all works. So this is a synapse and there's a neurotransmitter in the nerve impulse. Okay, so here's what a neuron looks like. And these are the nerve cells, and this is where the nerve impulse goes. It goes down to the axon terminals, and they tend to connect with the dendrites of a neighbor cell. This is interesting too. This is the axon. And when we say that brains continue to develop until children are age 25, what that means is this myelin sheath here has a fatty covering. And as those brains mature into the 20s, the fatty covering gets thicker. And that speeds along nerve impulses so the brain becomes more efficient. So that is what we say when we're growing brains. Okay, so what this means is that what causes those nerve impulses and those neurotransmitters to go? Experiences, repetitive experiences. So the more we talk to kids, sing to kids, read to kids, the better they connect their brain cells. Okay. Also, interactions help, good nutrition, and especially interactions in our digital world where we don't tend to talk a lot. That is what we need to do with young children. Okay, so also interesting with brain cells is the issue of gray and white matter. Gray matter makes up most of the parts of the neuron except for the myelin sheath. So this part here. So gray matter is more this part. White matter is the myelin, and it gets its name from the white fatty cells it's made up with. The growth of gray matter actually peaks in early childhood, while the white matter continues to develop into early adulthood. So the creation of connections between neurons is called synaptogenesis, or synapse formation. Neurons that communicate with each other more often form stronger connections across their synapses. Neurons need to connect with other neurons to perform a particular function, such as hearing or smelling. And these connections can cross short distances in the brain or very long distances, or even down the spinal cord. How does a neuron know which other neurons to connect with? It responds to neurotransmitters and other signals in the environment. So some neurons have specific functions. For example, a motor neuron drives our muscles. Other neurons, such as neurons in our eyes that sense light, or those in our noses that sense smells, fine-tune their connections based on stimulation they receive. And the same is true of neurons in the regions of the brain that process language and identify faces. As children have experiences and they get sensory information from their environment, the brain fine-tunes those connections between neurons that help us learn a language or identify a face. Okay, so the more often a child has a particular experience, the stronger the connections will be in the brain. So you want your child to have lots and lots and lots of positive experiences in childhood. Okay, so neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to modify itself and adapt to new experiences in the environment. Our brains have the greatest plasticity at the beginning of life, and it decreases as we age. But that doesn't mean the brain quits learning. It just means that the impact of the environment has the biggest impact on developing brains, because infants and children are learning so much. Okay, the brain's development unfolds in what we call a hierarchical order, so that networks that are forming in the brain begin with the most critical functions for survival, such as seeing and hearing, and then move on to more complex functions, such as math or complex problem solving. There's also two types of neuroplasticity: experience expectant, which is biological and everyone has it, and experience dependent, which is experiential and not everybody has it. Oh, there we go. So connections based on exposure to experiences that most people would have in their environment is what we call experience expectant. And the connections are made only if the person is exposed to the experience. So, for example, language development. Experience dependent only happens if the child has the environmental stimuli to build those connections. So new experiences make new connections. For example, children living in an agricultural farm community develop awareness of weather patterns and animal responses in ways that kids growing up in cities do not. So experience-dependent neuroplasticity is what allows us to learn and adapt to our environment. Scientists used to think that experience-based neuroplasticity stopped after early childhood, but they now know this is not true. While the brain does become less plastic as we age, it does not stop. Okay, we also know there is sensitive and critical periods, a timing of when a person is exposed to certain environmental stimuli can affect the development of neural connections. So, some areas of development have windows of time that close more quickly, and those are called critical periods. And others stay open longer, called sensitive periods. So critical periods, after the time period ends, the window of opportunity is gone. But sensitive periods just require a bit more effort. So for example, learning a foreign language, would you say that's more a sensitive or a critical period? Okay, it's more a sensitive period. So the optimal time for children to learn new languages is before age 5. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just takes a bit more effort when a child is 20 and trying to learn. So that's why children or individuals who learn a new language after puberty will almost always speak it with a foreign accent. Sensitive periods are time in development when a brain region is most open to learning, and new connections are formed there. Okay. Oh, there we go. Jumped ahead a bit, time. Okay. And it's important to know different parts of the brain have different sensitive periods. Like I said, that temporal lobe is especially sensitive during the toddler years, and that's why you get so many toddler tantrums that you wouldn't get during the preschool years or the school age years. And here you can see seeing and hearing is very sensitive in that first year, and same with language development. That's why we say talk to your babies, read to your babies, involve them in conversation. And it's really difficult even though they don't talk back. But when we go for a walk with our babies, we tend to be on our phones. But it's so important to point things out, use lots of vocabulary, and help babies develop their language skills because they're in that sensitive period in the first year. And you can see here, higher cognitive functions start developing here up until about there. Okay, now the brain also does some pruning. Pruning is a process by which neural circuits are refined. So what happens is so you can see a newborn baby, these connected neurons are mostly for those bottom brain functions to motor control, coordination, heart, breathing. And then after baby's born, they gain experiences. They observe the world around them, people interact with them, they learn in the context of relationships. And then by 6 years old, look how many brain connections they have. They have so many. And that's almost not good because the brain needs to prune connections for it to run more efficiently. So, so overproduction of synapses peaks in early childhood between 5 and 6 years old. And excess synapses are removed by pruning, which peaks in adolescence and continues into adulthood. So this is stronger brain connections, but more efficient. Okay. So what can you do to promote healthy brain development? So realize what are reasonable expectations based on brain development. So that attention is one thing. If you bring a toddler to a circle time in the library and the toddler cannot sit still and pay attention, they're not being bad. That's their brain development. They just can't do it. So maybe we let it go for a year or two and bring them back when they have that more developed area of their brain. So realistic expectations are very, very important. Another example of that is, when can a child cross the street alone without an adult? Not before at least age 9, because that eye processing, the ability to see a car coming and estimate how much time their body has to get across the road before the car comes, that visual perception doesn't develop till at least age 9. So that's why children need help to cross roads. So have a realistic expectations of brain architecture. Be aware that the experiences we provide are building brain architecture. So what that means is, don't put your kids on screens all day. Have them interact. Young children learn through 3-dimensional interactions with their environment and other people. They need to hear language. They need to have play dates with other kids when they reach about age 3. They need to explore. So we used to keep toddlers in playpens 30 years ago, and then the science came out that that's limiting their interaction with their environment. So we get them out of playpens, let them explore, but make it safe and supervised. And lastly, provide positive relationships and supportive, enriching environments. So have lots of books around, lots of open-ended toys, and lots of interaction with people in their family, their parents. And through this course, we're not going to go into this, but I'll just throw some nuggets out there that children just need one caring, wonderful adult to grow up super healthy. They don't need a whole lot of adults, even though more adults are better. So if they have a caring caregiver, if they have a parent who's caring, they have a grandparent who's caring, maybe a family friend who's caring, the more adults they have, the better. But they only need one for healthy brain development. And they need a stimulating environment that, has it. And I will guarantee you your house now is stimulating enough. You don't have to worry about that. The other thing is to keep the stress level down. You want their sympathetic nervous system not activated on a regular basis. So you want low stress in your house, very low stress. And stress is what we call adverse childhood experiences. It's kind of my list of 10 parenting no-nos, but it's things like physical abuse, emotional abuse, and that includes spanking, physical punishment, timeouts or emotional punishment, letting them cry it out, that raises stress level. So this program is on non-punitive parenting. So parents provide support, they provide guidance, they provide instruction, but they're always a safe, caring, nurturing relationship that children can have. Okay, and that's probably all I'm going to talk about tonight. Key messages, I could go over these again, I guess. The brain's not fully developed at birth. It grows in size and connectivity, grows from the back to the front, from the bottom up, and it's largely formed at birth, the brainstem, giving us the ability to go through everyday functions. The forebrain, so that is the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, is shaped by experiences in early childhood and is responsible for higher order functions such as thinking, planning, problem solving, sensory processing, emotional regulation, and language development. We play a key role in providing children developmentally appropriate stimulation and responsive nurturing care to foster healthy brain growth in childhood. Okay, well, that's about it. So we have a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions on this? What I might do is, while you're thinking of questions, let's talk about, one of the exercises is a bedtime routine, because all parents struggle with getting their children to bed. But how can we build brains while we're going through the bedtime routine? Okay, so let's say a parent sings to their child before bed. They're building language and hearing, and language is in the temporal lobe, hearing's in the parietal lobe. Let's say they stay and just pat the child gently to sleep, pat their head as they're drifting off to sleep. That's touch, right? Those sensory processing, that's the parietal lobe. Lights, so putting down the lights, making sure the house is put to bed, and quietness, lights, that's visual. That puts the occipital lobe to bed. A bath, a nice warm bath before bed, that's touch through the parietal lobe. Maybe reading a story and cuddling. The story provides hearing and language, and the cuddling provides satisfaction to the heartbeat, emotional needs, support, and sometimes smell. It stimulates smell in that parietal lobe. Like If you're breastfeeding, they can smell. It's very comforting to them. And that's in the temporal lobe too. We could play music, and that would stimulate hearing and language in the parietal and temporal lobe. So there's lots of ways a positive bedtime routine stimulates brains. And we don't think of it that way. We think of it more like, oh, I have to stimulate my child's brain. I better take him to this class on Mozart music. But just simple things we do in our life. For example, wearing your baby in a sling and they can watch you peel a potato. To them, it's absolutely fascinating. To us, it's peeling a potato, but you're building your child's brain. And even more so if you talk to them and tell them what you're doing. I'm peeling a potato. So that I hope that's a good example of showing you that brain development does not have to be this big onerous task. It's something we do every day when we interact with our kids. Okay, well, we don't seem to have any more questions. Anyways, I'm going to stop the recording now, and I just want to thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope this was helpful. It's really important to learn child development just to have realistic expectations. And in the book, Attachment Parenting Tips, which I hope you've gotten by now, you will, in the sections for every age group, you will see the appropriate development based on what's happening in the brain. So use that as your guide for what you should expect at each age. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next month when we talk about, I think it's discipline next month. And we will definitely look at discipline through the eyes of brain development. Okay. All right, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.